You know what's harder than learn how to play guitar? Bet you don't know. Fishing is harder than learning to play guitar. We'll talk about it in just a minute. I'll be right back. I'm D.W. Verts, Hickbilly Outdoors. Fishing is way more complicated than playing a guitar. So my analogy about the guitar and fishing. On that guitar, that fretboard, everything is there. All the answers is right there. Just the mechanical practice of learning to play it, which I've never mastered. The trick is, it's no trick. It's all right there. Fishing, unfortunately, gets pretty complicated. Some of the things I'm going to talk about right now can be some of that complicated stuff. Don't let it get to you. We're going to talk about terminal tackle. Terminal tackle means swivels, hooks, weights, things like that. So let's get right into it. Probably the most important thing we're going to talk about is hooks and hook sizes, because it's one of the things I see a lot of people mess up on. I didn't bring them with me. This circle hook is a pretty good sized catfish hook. It's a pretty big hook. It's actually a pretty massive hook, and I have drug hooks twice as big off the bottom and found them hanging on stuff the last couple of years. Folks, you don't need a big hook. That's I don't know what you're fishing for. Unless you're fishing for 50-pound flatheads, you don't need a big hook. Most of the fishermen I see use hooks are just wrong. Generally size, there's other things though involved. I'm going to say it this way. When you're fishing, you need to have goals. Or I like to have goals. First thing, what are you fishing for? If you are fishing for sunfish, bluegill, brim, they have small mouths, so you would use a small hook. Now hooks come in sizes that are rated from really small to huge, and it can be complicated. It's why, again, the fretboard's not that complicated on a guitar. But for instance, this hook is an Aberdeen crappie hook, like a minnow hook, and it's a size 6. I know that from looking at it. This hook here is a size 4. The smaller the number, the bigger the hook, until it's not. So you can have hooks as small as, 28, whatever, a little bitty, you put 3 or 4 of them on the end of your fingernail, all the way to size 1, which is the biggest hook in the regular numbers. Then they go the other way. You go 1/0 is bigger than a 1, 2/0 is bigger yet, and I'm guessing that's probably a 5/0 or 6/0. Complicated. See, it doesn't have to be that hard. Anyway, do not use too big a hook. Just don't do it. So you match it to the fish. You got sunfish, you got these brim, got little bitty mouths. Well, a big hook, you fishing a glob of worms on a hook this size, for a fish whose mouth won't even fit around it, you're just hurting yourself. We're at size 6, probably pretty close to being the best, even a size 8. Of course, too small, then you have a chance of swallowing it. There's all kinds of things. You need to experiment. It's nice to have a small assortment of hooks. True, and skipping ahead, a lot of tackle shops sell beginning boxes, starter boxes. I made fun of that in one of my videos, but they're usually pretty close. They'll have some hooks in them, some weights, maybe some corks, some bobbers, and they're not too expensive, so that may be a good way to go. You've got a couple, 3 sizes of hooks, you have several different kinds of weights. That's for $6 or so. That's probably not a bad investment if you're not sure. So match the hook size to the fish. I do a lot of bass fishing, and I did not bring in my bass fishing hooks. That's how horrible a job I do at this. I use hooks up to 7/0, bigger than that for bass. First off, I catch big bass. Secondly, bass have big mouths. Think about it. Catfishing, where you're globbing a bunch of bait up on a treble hook a lot of times, and a treble hook is not always the answer. You can glob a bunch of bait on a single hook too. That's a size 4. That is a really good overall size for most catfishing. I mean, really good size. Don't make it complicated. If you can get a variety, then a little practice, catch a few fish, and you can kind of decide for yourself, because fishing is all about not following other people, but making your own decisions. Match the size of the hook to the fish. The next thing is sinkers. And another thing I see problems with, sinkers are generally lead. Some places are tungsten because lead is so dangerous to our fish and wildlife. These egg sinker style like this are called, what reason it's called a bass casting sinker. I never did figure that out. You've got egg sinkers, slip sinkers that slip over the line. You've got split shot that you can clamp on the line. They're pretty handy. I'm going to tell you the secret, in my opinion, to sinkers is use the least weight you can get away with in any situation. Whether you're bait fishing or lure fishing, 90% of the time, the less weight you can use, the better off you're going to be. Fish won't be spooked by feeling the weight as much. You'll feel the fish better sometimes. And a slow, more natural fall, most of the time, is the way to go. If you can catch this treble hook with a glob of stink bait on it, with no weight at all, and lob it out 15 or 20 foot, you're going to catch more catfish than you will with a weight. I did a catfish video last fall where I showed how I use a weight so it doesn't affect it as much. You get a chance to look that up. I don't know how to put the links up, I guess, whatever. As little weight as possible most of the time. There are times in bass fishing when a real heavy weight's better. A real fast fall makes the fish bite. That's a rare occurrence. Natural. You throw a night crawler in the water, it's going to fall slow. It's going to it's going to look natural. That's what you want your bait to look like. Okay. Also, when you're fishing, you're trying to catch a bluegill with that hook right there. Don't put 3 or 4 night crawlers on it. Don't wad up a bunch of bait. Give him just enough to get his mouth on. You'll hook more fish that way. How's that for a tip? So sinkers come in a variety of forms. Slip sinkers I use a lot for bass fishing because they slide up a line. It's supposed to make it harder for a fish to get rid of the hook if the weight's up. And then I peg it in place with a toothpick so it can't move. Like I said, that fretboard in that guitar is way easier to live with, right? Another thing you're going to have in some kinds of fishing. Swivels. Swivels have their purposes. They really do. They come in several forms and varieties and all that. There's a 3-way. It's kind of too complicated, but there's a 3-way. Another trick. Yeah. Not too big a hook. Not too much weight. And the least thing that the less you can have between you and that fish, the better off you're going to be. The more hardware you put in between you, the more things can go wrong, and they will go wrong. So the swivel thing, it's okay. There's reasons for it. Most new fishermen don't need that. One minor thing that I would suggest, and it's only for certain situations, it's going to be hard to see, maybe that is a ball bearing swivel. It spins very freely. It can be handy in things. So that takes me to another step. Most new fishermen, and I was one of them, have a tendency to want to use a snap swivel. Because that snap, you can unhook it this easily. It opens up. I'm hoping that'll show up. It opens up, and so you can clip your lures on and off. Okay? So you take that lure, buy Shawarma glasses, and that quick, or bait, and that quick you've changed your bait. The problem with that is people forget to retie their knots, and you've got to learn to tie knots. Another video. A lot of stuff on YouTube about knots. We'll touch on it before we're done. So this ball bearing snap swivel can be a help. I'll tell you why in a second, but it's also very bad. You need to learn, whenever possible, to tie your line directly to your hooks, directly to your lures. So why did I say about ball bearing swivel, even with or without a snap? There's 2 instances I can think of right off the top of my head. These inline spinners that comes to the water with that spinner blade going around will twist your line up badly. A casting spoon like the old Daredevil, fish catching, oh man, what a good piece of metal. but they spin and they will twist your line up. They'll create snarls and messes, heartache. So if you use that ball bearing swivel on the front, that allows the lure to spin but doesn't twist your line up as bad. There's a point to that. I still would highly suggest that you don't use a snap on a swivel. Even there, the split ring on both ends, you can put one on the other end, is still better. Again, you won't tie a knot as often enough because you do need to retie, and that snap's another weak link. All these things on there can be weak links. If the swivels and things aren't weak links in themselves, the knots you tie to them are more weak links, more places for failure. That makes sense? Bobbers come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. I don't fish with bait hardly at all. So this is going back to the old days. But when I was guiding fishermen today, bobbers were critical. The stand-up bobber like that is a more finessey bobber. It shows bites better. Sometimes you'll have it in the water, it'll go like this because the fish has got it. It'll actually lay up instead of go down. But I still throw the little round, cheapy bobbers. Don't use a bobber like a balloon. Don't do that. Use the smallest bobber you can use. It still keeps your bait or lure up. Yeah, I said lure. That's a whole other cool kind of fishing. No. Use a bobber just big enough that it floats up with your lure or bait hanging off of it. That's kind of simple, I think. Terminal tackle. The stuff that's between you and the fish. Pretty critical. It's like the line. It's a critical deal, but it's not complicated. If you're going to decide first what fish you're fishing for, and most people are starting off, a lot of people watch this, are going to fish for the sunfish, the brim. They're going to fish for catfish or carp. You do not need big hooks. You need simple stuff. The less hardware you have between you and that hook, the better. The less weight you have, the better. And keep your bait as small as possible. I've said that in my catfish video. When you take that treble hook, I think that number 4 is about a perfect size. You wedge that bait on there. You cover that thing up just enough to cover the barbs. So it's a little teardrop shape, and that's all. There's no reason to throw a big old call the bait's going to come off anyway. Same thing with worms. Are these plastic worms that use the dip baits are pretty cool because they hold just the right amount of bait. You dip those things in that bait, kind of mash on your fingers, are good to go. That's a kind of cool bait. It's pretty simple, y'all, and I'm trying to keep it simple, to the short and to the point. We're going to go fishing pretty soon on this thing. We got more things to cover, but I think I'm going to interject a fishing video in just to change the pace if it ever quits raining. Thank y'all. Dale Verts, talk to you later.